Hello. So in this episode of Writing Notes, I'm going to be talking with Logan Venderlic, who's a web designer, and we're going to be talking about some of the basic principles of web design. So first off, Logan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Phil. Appreciate it.
And incidentally, I do want to say my computer's bandwidth is not fantastic, so if on this video Logan freezes temporarily, that's my computer's fault and not his. So Logan Venderlic is an independent web developer and designer, project manager, and musician with the band Emma's Lounge. And I will put a card up in the top corner of this video for their YouTube channel and a link for their website down below in the description. He's been self-employed for 7 years. And for the last 2 years, he's been working closely with Futures Bright, which is a design agency in Asheville, North Carolina. So, Logan, I want to start by asking you, what are some of the general principles of design that are most important to you when you're building a website?
Sure. So to me, I kind of wrote three down. The three main ones I think I focus on most are trying to do the most you can with the least. So trying to kind of boil everything down to its core and only leave what's, crucial there. Yeah. And some of the other things along with that I think about are like trying to think at scale, trying to think about how you can replicate things over and over and scale them, so that you're not redoing a ton of work. With that too, when it comes to the development world, thinking about things logically and thinking about conditional logic and when to do something or when not to, which can help with, page speed and things like that. But the next thing I would say is always keep trying to learn and be diligent and just get creative with troubleshooting. I'm a self-taught web designer and I did not go to school for web design, but I wanted to create some sort of freelance business for myself, especially because I want to play music. So I just taught myself over several years and been able to, find a little freelance career for myself doing it. And that just required constantly being open to learning new things, being really diligent, and then just, being persistent. Whenever you meet challenges, just try to get creative and troubleshoot as much as possible without, losing your patience. And then the final thing that I think is just crucial for web design is just precision to detail and just, get down to the very tiniest little details, whether it's design, there's a common term out there people call pixel perfect design, but it's, a cliche, I guess, but still, when you're designing something graphically, try to be as precise as possible on every little detail. When you're coding, you'll find that you can miss a very small detail and it totally screw up your website. If you leave a semicolon out of your CSS file, it can completely ruin all your styles for the entire website and it looks like your website's crashed. So just precision to detail.
Okay. That's great advice. And actually that really aligns with a lot of the stuff that I teach my business students about being concise, being specific, being detailed, and all these things. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of the principles you're talking about are the same kinds of things that we apply in our writing anyway.
Nice. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So I imagine generally when you're building websites, you're probably doing it for specific clients who have specific goals, objectives, ideas they want to convey, but you're also creating websites for audiences, for people who will go to those audiences, for people who will go to those websites. So how do you think about audiences when you're designing websites? What role does the idea of the web viewer play in your creative process?
It's a crucial role. It's something we try to, think about and practice and get better at every day. A lot of it for us is a really small agency. It's just, taking our best guess and getting feedback from one another and from other designers and from the client. If we've designed something and they say it doesn't make sense to them or they didn't know what to do, then we need to do our job better. Essentially, if a user can't find their way around your site and find the information they need quickly, then essentially you failed. So it's really crucial that you think about that the whole time. And so, there's some tools out there if you go further down the rabbit hole, like one's called Hotjar, and it can do heat maps of your website and help give you insights on where users might be getting hung up. But on a simpler term, you can achieve good user experience in a lot of different ways. You can do it through, the branding side of things, and just repeating the same kind of idea over and over to give the user insight on what something means or how things are categorized. Like, for instance, if you have a company that, like a drink company that has 3 different main drink lines, like kombucha, soda, tonic water, or whatever. If you assign color to each of those things, like kombucha's purple and soda's red and tonic water is orange or whatever, and then you just keep repeating those colors and that color scheme everywhere you talk about that certain thing on the website, that can help cue the user in to, even if they're not specifically thinking kombucha is purple, if they just see it over and over, it's kind of just becomes something that they expect. So that can be a good, a good thing to think about. Simple interactions, the most basic one I can think of is just built into web browsers. But if you're on a desktop computer and you scroll over an item that can be clicked, the cursor turns to a little pointer finger. And we've done things like that as well, that you can customize. So a few years ago, we were working for a client where we wanted to put a side scrolling feature in the middle of a page. And the client was worried that, especially on desktop, the user might not realize that they were allowed to scroll side to side. And some of the content on one side was cut off intentionally to indicate that you can, scroll side to side. They were worried that they still might not know. So we ended up doing a custom cursor feature there where you hover over that area and it turns the pointer, or turns the cursor into 2 side to side arrows with a little call to action that says scroll side to side. So just little things like that with user interaction. And then, you guys, you're in a business writing class. So good copywriting is another really good one. So sometimes it can be straight up, just, like I said, scroll side to side, really direct direction there. But it can also just be being really thoughtful and careful about, your copywriting and how to say something most effectively so that any user can pick it up really quickly with as few words as possible, essentially. Most cases, that's what you're going to want to do, unless your brand calls for something else. But people's train of thought is people don't have a lot of patience a lot of times when they're browsing websites. They kind of want the information they want as quickly as possible, or they kind of give up. So part of your job with copywriting is to take this big idea you have and condense it down to as few words as possible to get your idea across.
Yeah. Short attention spans for online readers generally.
For sure.
So you've already kind of touched on this, but it's difficult to convey messages visually. So can you talk a little bit more about how you approach sort of creating visual impact?
Sure. So the founder of the company I'm working with, Futures Bright, his name's Tim, and he calls this part of the process digging to find the spark. And When we start any project off, we might not be fully inspired yet. We might not, know exactly what direction we're going to go or how we're going to convey brand personality or messaging. And so that's a big, initial thing that we kick off every project with is, like he says, digging to find the sparks. So trying to figure out how to convey what this brand is all about, what this company is all about, graphically, through copywriting, just the whole branding process. And I'll say again, a really helpful thing is if you can get feedback from people you trust. In my case, I get to bounce ideas off of the other designers with my company, but we also get to bounce ideas off of our clients, which it tends to be, if you let it be, it tends to be very helpful because they are not designers usually. And so like, if you send something to them and it doesn't just feel right, then that's a good indication that it might not feel right to the average user out there. So you kind of have to be thick-skinned and just keep iterating until you find it.
Yeah. So I've actually done a video on personal branding before for a business writing context, but can you say a little bit more about how you conceptualize branding or how you build that through web design?
Sure, yeah. I guess it's a pretty big task, but you kind of have these basic elements to work with, colors and typeface and, spacing and photo treatment, copywriting, all of these things that come together to form a brand. And essentially you kind of want to build a personality. You want to build like this character that represents the company or yourself.
Absolutely.
Or whatever the website is for. Yeah. And so honestly, it's super helpful if you're finding yourself kind of stuck to look for inspiration outside of yourself, whether it's through other art forms, like literally any art form or nature or other types of websites or companies that are doing something similarly. Like say you want to have a brand that feels kind of retro. Maybe you look for other companies that are doing something similarly and you look at their typefaces. There are some websites out there where you can take a picture of a piece of copy with a font in it and upload it, and it'll try to spit out what that font is. Or you can also, if you know enough about web design, you can also inspect Element in the browser and find exactly what that font is through that process. But like what makes it feel retro or what makes it feel whatever the brand personality is. And it's probably a mixture of all these things. Like maybe there's a really cool retro looking typeface. Maybe the photos look kind of gritty and like grainy, like old school and a little out of date. The language that, the copywriting is written in should sound like, maybe it uses a little bit of like slang almost. If it's like you're going for an 80s thing, maybe use some like little bits of like slang in there that sound a little retro and like call on pop culture of that time. So there are a lot of different ways that you can define it. So
that's great. And that actually starts to move toward answering the next question that I was going to ask you, which is when you're at the beginning of a project and if you're maybe struggling with where to start thinking about the design you want for this, what kinds of things do you do to get inspired?
Yeah, definitely. That and that goes back to like digging for the spark. It's there are many times when you start off not being hit over the head with this lightning bolt of inspiration, and for so many reasons. Sometimes, you just put in so much time and energy into the last project or something else is going on in your life or whatever. And that's just kind of how creative inspiration is. It's like sometimes it just comes along and you're just, carried by this energy, that you can get into that, tap into that really quickly. Other times you're just not, and it takes a little bit of work. And honestly, again, I'd say just, start looking out at other things outside of yourself. Like I said, whether it's art or nature, or, literally if it's functional, you can like walk, look into like mechanical stuff, or if you're walking by a construction site and seeing how that's built, or seeing the tools that are used, or the type of people who are there working there, or whatever. You can look out into nature, as silly as it may sound. I mean, you can look at like, how does a tree grow, or like, how does a pilot fish swim with a shark, or whatever. Just like, you can be inspired by so many different things. Like, if you're trying to build a brand that has a specific personality, then try to look for other things in life that are doing similar things. And on a even more just straight up level, you can just look at other websites. Try to find like 5 to 10 other websites that have a brand and a feel that just look and feel sort of like what you're going for, and then start to analyze that. And instead of, I feel like with web design or any art, when it's done really well, the user or the person experiencing the art is really kind of taken along for a ride. Like, they're just carried away by this cool thing that's just really wonderfully executed. And you kind of forget everything else, and you're just taken along for this ride because it feels fully formed. So like, if you find other websites or other pieces of art that are doing what you would like to do, or something really close to that, then start to try to like break them down and like take a step off the ride instead of just being along for the ride, and try to break them down and be like, what typefaces are they using? Like, what does the copy sound like? Like, I don't know. There's a website I was looking at recently for some inspiration that had a very like, I don't know, they cussed a lot, and they like were really just kind of like masculine, I guess, and like just we're all about just getting stuff done and that kind of thing. Like, if that's what you're going for, then like, one of the things I remember from that website, they had that vibe. That brand was like, we're all about just getting stuff done. But when they'd have a cuss word, it would like be handwritten in the middle of typeface, and there'd be a cuss word would be like blanked out with handwritten like characters like $, what exclamation point, whatever. So if you start looking at like breaking down the elements that create this vibe, looking at the photo treatment of things, the typeface, the colors that are used, if you're looking for a retro vibe, then you're probably going to want to use really like high contrast, really bright colors, neon kind of stuff. If you're looking for something natural, you're going to go the opposite of that. Look for like earth tones and stuff that feels more relaxing. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it should be. I mean, one of the, I think, sort of challenging things for a lot of people, especially people who don't have as much sort of background in the creative arts and things like that as you do. I mean, you're a musician, you're a songwriter, poet, singer, etc., etc. Like, it can be really challenging to figure out where you start being creative if it's not something that you necessarily do regularly. So even though I think you've kind of covered this, can you give us some sort of top tips for how to stimulate creativity?
Sure, I'll try.
I know that's probably a difficult question.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I think that, for me, I'm often inspired by artists and by other people who are doing creative things. So, like, a lot of times if I'm not sure, where to find the creative spark, looking at other people's work who have done really cool things always gets me kind of excited and hyped, and sometimes sparks something in me where I'm like, oh wow, like that's super cool. I'd love to do something like that, but in this way, you know? And so just looking at other creatives' work, super helpful. And then, you know, just writing a lot for me. Writing is helpful. It may not be helpful for everyone, but like, you know, in any sort of creative endeavor, I feel like just writing everything out, like literally everything that you have on your mind, just kind of, you know, vomiting, you know, like putting everything out there without editing yourself at all, just to start with, and then start kind of like editing down from there, like picking out the best parts of what you've written, of your ideas.
Yeah.
To be like, oh wow, actually I really like this idea. And then if you do find an idea eventually, after just like going through iterations and just writing everything possible that you can write down, pick some of your favorite things and then try to break them down into like more manageable steps. Like, okay, I want this cool thing for my website, this cool feature. How do I actually go about doing that? And that's just that'll, you know, often require some learning and, you know, Googling around until you can find even what the thing is that, you know, what it's called. Like, you know, usually whatever you're trying to do, unless it's just completely unique and has never been done before, it's probably been done before and it probably has a name. So like if you search around and you find that name, then you can search for that name and start going down that rabbit hole and learning more about how that's done and who's done it well. Yeah, I mean, and honestly, one of the other things that just pops to the top of my head, two other things, like for me, it's always been helpful going for a walk or going for a drive, like just alone. Like walking alone, going for a drive alone, whenever just in silence for me, like just having time with your thoughts and just kind of pondering on an idea for a while without any distractions. Like that oftentimes is really helpful. Walking for me, just the physical movement, like getting up off my butt and going outside if I can, and walking often like sparks some creativity.
Yeah. I think that's actually a great point, because that's one of the pieces of advice I ideally give to students in my writing classes, is some variation of, if you can step back away from the thing that you're doing, even if you're not necessarily struggling with it, when you come back to it, you can come back to it with a clearer mind, and you can maybe approach it more like a reader than you did like the person who wrote it. So,
absolutely. That's great advice. Yeah, I've had so many instances where like I'm struggling to solve a problem or get inspired or, you know, fix some issue in web design. And just like, just walking away, literally physically walking away from it, taking some time, maybe drinking some water, drinking some coffee, whatever, and then approaching it with, you know, fresh eyes after you get back. And you're right, you can, if you're able to kind of get a little bit away from it, physically and metaphorically, then it can help you see it with fresh eyes and, you know, just take you out of that rut.
Absolutely. All right. So Logan, thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Phil. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah.